Dr. Phil Gore, how are you?
Hey, great to be with you today, Matt.
Hey, great to have you. You are somebody I've been wanting to talk to for a while. You and I met several months back at the ISBA convention, which was fantastic. I really enjoyed that evening and the conversation that was had. But you are the Chief Learning Officer for the ISBA. Is that accurate?
That's right.
God bless it.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on with education in the state of Idaho right now. One really interesting thing is that the school choice initiative that was pushed and signed and has now become law. Part of the argument for that was people saying, hey, my children don't go to an Idaho public school. And because they don't go to an Idaho public school, they go to a private school or something else, my tax dollars should not go to that Idaho public school. My tax dollars should follow me. And that to me seemed like, again, I'm not for or against school choice, but that principle as a foundation of the argument made me really nervous because I knew very quickly on the tail end of that, anybody who doesn't have children in Idaho public schools, any of those people would be able to quickly say, well, my kids don't go there.
Right.
I either don't have kids or my kids went to school somewhere else or, whatever it is. So where's my money? Where's my money going to my essentially coming back to me? You have an answer to the question of why public education. And that's something that I think we need to reintroduce to the American population and very specifically to the Idaho population. So I ask you here, why public education?
It's a great question, Matt. And I've been writing and talking about this topic for a couple of decades now. First of all, we have to realize that public education is both a private and a public good. Right. So it's a private good in the sense that a child is able to learn things, gain some marketable skills, potentially be able to enter the workforce. And for some of us that care, they're able to think more authentically, more deeply about current topics and life needs. Right. So they're able to contribute something back. And so there's that blend between the private good of public education, which goes with the student, if you will. But the more important thing that our founding fathers saw to be very beneficial was this public good, right? That over the last couple of centuries, people in charge of U.S. government and state governments have realized that there is an impetus to having an educated workforce. Now, we've got to realize, like it or not, here in Idaho, the federal government has a vested interest in the outcomes of public education in Idaho, right? They need educated people to fight in the armed services. They need educated people to contribute to our greater society in the state and outside of the state. So there's multiple vested interest here. And the state has a tremendous vested interest in the outcomes of public education. The state can't afford to have a bunch of children that are uneducated, dependent upon the state, or involved in illicit activities or stealing from their neighbors and friends, right? Like, what does a child do if they don't have an adequate education for which they can apply themselves, earn some money, live what we would think of as a respectable life?
Okay, hang on. I hear everything you're saying. Okay, but I think some people construe lack of education, you saying like, hey, if you're not educated, you're essentially synonymous or you're the only options would be a criminal. Right now, that sentiment gets bastardized to, hey, if you're not going to college, if you're not seeking this next level of higher education, you don't have anything to contribute, which is, again, overwhelmingly not true. What you're getting at is, look, if we have an individual, right? Like, this is the individual. This is Steve. Steve can't read. Steve can't write. Steve can't do math.
Right.
Steve did not learn pipe welding in a CTE program. Steve did not learn auto mechanic. He did not learn culinary arts. Like West Ada has a very fantastic culinary arts program. Sure. He didn't learn any of this stuff.
Right.
Okay. Now Steve's 18. And he is not educated either in a way of, the great thinkers or the great doers. Okay, he has none of that. And again, our school districts are providing both of these things. So what is Steve to do? Okay, after his mom kicks him out of his house.
Right, at some point.
At some point, Steve has no discernible skills.
Exactly.
So what do you think is going to happen? Right. And again, we can give the most charitable, glowing interpretation of the resilience of the human spirit. It's like, well, Steve can like pull himself up. Steve could, but we also have a much much, much higher probability that that person is going to fall into desperate circumstances with any lack of discernible skill.
Steve can't pull himself up by the bootstraps if he doesn't have any bootstraps to pull on. Right? Public education, as you've talked about, those basic skills of reading, writing, being able to do math, having a general understanding of how society works, at least some semblance of an understanding of history and literature, to have perspectives and options, right? Public education serves that opportunity to sort of expand the horizons for people to learn and know there are more things out there that they could be doing. And if Steve doesn't want to go to college or doesn't have the academic skills to go to college, more power to it, because there are plenty of non-college graduates that make more money a year than I do as somebody with a PhD. And so I don't at all want to discount the opportunity for somebody to become a welder, a lineman, garbage truck drivers in cities make more than the average person with a PhD. The reality is people need to be able to pursue their dreams, their vision, their hopes, something that is meaningful for them. And when they are given that opportunity and that sort of compulsion or compelling from within, right? The drive to know they can be something and do something, they're very likely to do it.
There are many stories of, for instance, people that were freed from slavery, that educated themselves, right? And then go on to write incredible narratives and memoirs and recount the power of education and the power with learning how to read, learning how to write, learning how to express themselves. And that's kind of the value proposition that I think people need to remember, which is, look, there's a sentiment around our public education system now that has been souring for some time.
Right.
And okay, perhaps things need to change, for communities, or schools to reflect more closely their community values, which is absolutely important, right? Like that's the nature of the charter school programs, which is, hey, what's specific here, different things like that. We can all argue about, hey, different board members perhaps, or different policies with this, all of that makes sense. But the idea that, hey, in this particular moment, we don't feel like our public schools are 100% aligning with our community values, so we need to throw out the concept and the system in its entirety. It's like, whoa.
Right.
Like all you have to do is read from somebody in our past American history that was refused an education and understand their perspective when they started getting it. And then you understand, like, oh my God, that's the power of education.
Sure. Tara Westover, right? Educated, a memoir. We have a lot of examples of incredible documents out there like that, where somebody found their own path, if you will, in spite of very difficult circumstances. And so, number one, we have to be really careful as people who govern, lead, oversee public education. We have to be really careful that we don't discount or dismiss anyone, because frankly, we don't know who the next person is that will, take us to Mars or cure some type of cancer or ALS or something, right? It's really important that you said something earlier, representing community values. That's a critical piece. And I would just add also community vision. Like if the local public schools are out of step with either one, what the local community has for its vision for its schools or its values for its schools, then you've got that disconnect that's going to cause dissonance, disruption, chaos in school systems. My day job is working with school boards, day in and day out. I've been doing this for almost 18 years, started out in Washington State. I've worked all over the country with school boards. And those are two critical elements that we often talk about is, are you representing the vision and values that your community has for its schools? And in Idaho, whether that's a district or whether it's a charter, right? Well, if they haven't asked the community, gone out and sought what the vision and values are, we can help them with that, and we do, but it's really paramount. Because once that gets out of sync, out of step, it's just a phenomena, particularly with school boards. In general, over the last 400 years, nobody cares who's on the school board.
Right. And people would run unopposed for decades. Nobody paid attention.
And up to this current time. I mean, there are very small communities where they're lucky to find enough people with a pulse to serve on the board. Right. And so, it kind of, beckons to me and to others like, let's not make it any more onerous than it has to be, but let's also support and equip so they can be successful in this role, regardless of how much time they have, interest, all of that kind of thing. What does it take for them to be successful in representing, first of all, the community vision and values? Because again, if they don't do that, then the community does care who's on the school board. And what we see as a phenomena in social science is that when the community cares, they really care. So then they're ready to just throw out all the incumbent board members, come in with a new batch. And the dilemma is that creates changes in policy, changes in procedures, changes in performance expectations, the way people are evaluated. It has a direct impact on student achievement and student learning in the classroom.
What you just described, very interestingly. So I used to live in the state that shall not be named.
The dirty C word.
Yeah, right. And I was an SAT tutor from the week I graduated college until I moved here when I was 39 in the beginning of 22. And I had started a little podcast there just, for my SAT students. That's what they wanted. But
nice.
COVID hit. And all of a sudden, that podcast, that's where I really cut my teeth on interviewing people that from opposite sides of an issue. And
nice.
By the way, I experienced the same thing that I experience here, which is whenever I interview somebody from this side, the other side gets mad. And then when I inevitably get onto that side,
sure.
the opposite side gets mad. Everybody gets mad at me for just having this conversation. But what I found was really interesting. The first big thing that I really did was covering a school board election. And there was this school board, there were 3 spots up and people were hot. This is the end of 2020.
Oh, yeah.
Those schools were locked down. I mean, it was a really, they're like
mask.
over your eyes and your mouth, like the whole thing.
Right.
And there was one of the school board members who was the president of the school board, who had been on the school board for 20 years, this guy, Greg Marvel. And he even had a consulting business where like little side thing where he was helping, very much like the ISBA, he was helping other school boards understand how to keep administrative costs low, how to, work on long-term investments for maintenance, don't get shingled roofs, get metal roofs, like all these different things, right? And Greg Marvel, as you articulated, when the community cares, it really cares.
Yes.
And so they were very upset at the happenings, and they're like, get rid of Greg, as if Greg was the sole reason for all of these things. And they had all of these reductionist problems. There was a problem where the superintendent got the same raise that the teachers union got. It was I think it was actually called the Me Too, but before that was a thing. Me Too raise, or again, they paired it all together. So look, because the administration didn't have a union representation, right? So it's like if the teachers got the raise, that got passed on to the superintendent. People are furious about this. And interestingly, through conversations with Greg and community members, towards the end of the campaign, right before the election, the people that were most out for Greg's head all of a sudden started turning around and being like, oh no, what have we done? Because Greg was always the right guy, but it took a long time for people to understand what Greg had been doing over 20 years and why they were in the situation they were. And all of a sudden people these people that were classically very much against him on social media, like, we need to replace Marvel. All of a sudden we're going onto social media like, hey guys, hang on a second. Like, we may have not gotten this right. And that was like the week before the election. And then Greg got voted out. And, so again, when the community shows up to care, it really cares. Right. But it also lacks broader context to the happenings and like, okay, but this is what we've been doing over the last 10 years. Like, let us bring you up to speed on why the decisions were made. And I'm not saying they're always right or wrong, but it's like, we at the very least need to understand why the policies and situation in the school district is what it is.
Sure. I think that's a typical common problem all across the country where people have been on a school board for a long time in general, and they become a little more lackadaisical about communicating with the public. Right. And I see this happen in large urban areas where there's demographic shift.
Interesting.
The biggest problems in public education are in the suburbs. Just saying, right? That's where kind of the culture clashes happen. That's where the difference of values happens. Urban centers, they're going to do what urban centers do. They're going to fly far to the left, right? Rural communities, they're going to do what rural communities do. They're going to fly far to the right. But it's in the suburban areas where you get that conflict of values of what people have traditionally wanted, what new people want. And I've lived in a lot of these communities that are like 50-50 Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. And, that's where kind of the tectonic plates sort of rub against each other and cause a lot of challenge.
Wait, you are literally describing what's going on in the Treasure Valley right now with, like West Ada, the
Sure.
Boise School District. Like
Sure.
these are, I mean, I could not, people moving here, the combination of more liberal people in the city of Boise all the way out. I mean, like, wow,
Right.
I had no idea that this is a more national, like very predictable problem.
It is a predictable problem, and it's most predictable or most expected when school boards have not been attentive to it. Right. So we do have other areas across the state of Idaho where demographic shifts are happening. And there are, I'm not sure that I want to go too far into where, what, and
I was going to ask where, but let's leave that out.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
turn the mics off first because there are somewhere, and I see this,
Sure.
Community leaders are sort of either asleep or dismissing or discounting the shift of people and the populace that are coming in. Yeah, I think it's inherent problem for any of us. When we've lived in a community a long time and we've come to expect this is the way things are, and we're operating our lives accordingly, and then things are sort of slowly shifting because nearly all social change happens gradually,
Right.
and then all of a sudden, right? And I think that's what COVID sort of emphasized for us, was that all of a sudden spark, if you will.
God, listen, I'm not, keep going.
Well,
I have no
yeah.
meaningful questions or contribution. I love what so how do,
Yeah.
with bringing it back to the why.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. When you have this mass conflict,
Yes.
and you need to kind of come back to, okay, we have this conflict. People want to go right. They want to go left. We have to come back to our why as the Northern Star with like, okay, we proceed through this very difficult and conflict-ridden area by orienting ourselves to why we're even here.
Yeah, I think the most important piece of that is let's stay with the why. Like the why of public education or the why of a particular school district, why do we exist? What are we trying to accomplish? That needs to be consistently kept in front of people, like not something that just sort of falls off the map. I love the concept of Simon Sinek's book and work, start with why. But I would say not only start with why, continue with why, stay with why. Don't lose sight of the why, the North Star. Davis Campbell, former executive director of the California Association of School Boards and an international researcher on educational leadership, Michael Fullen, they put together a book about 6 years ago, and it's entitled, why would the words escape me? Governance Core. The Governance Core. There's a Governance Core 2.0 now, which is new and improved. But they articulate in the first edition the essential element of having what they call a moral imperative. And they've since kind of not used that word because it can be so misleading to people that don't understand that we're not talking about your morals per se, but we're talking about that compelling why, that sense of, and this is a critical conversation for a school board together with a superintendent or a charter administrator. What is our moral imperative? What can the 6 or 8 or however many of us agree to? This is the one thing that we must do, that we won't allow deviation from, right? And when the local school leadership has that kind of conversation, commitment, usually in writing, like this is what we're going to base our decisions on. And it may be something that seems trite or simple, like, is this in the best interest of kids? Like, however they choose to frame that, but not losing sight of it because some opinion is controversial or, a powerful, influential person is wanting something else. Not losing sense of that North Star, that purpose, that why. What was it that we committed we're going to do here? And that doesn't mean not listening. It doesn't even mean not shifting that over time if need be. But if there's no conversation, no agreement about the why, all the rest is just, it's stuffing. It's things that sort of rattle around and fall apart, right? When the pressure's on, people fall apart, organizations fall apart. If they don't have that clear sense of purpose, this is who we are, this is what we're committed to, this is the direction we're going.
When you're talking about this, the public education system as a whole has come under such pressure nationally and internationally, right? And you have such crisis moments where, you know, things happen. And for instance, right now, like Idaho is at the core of some like national thing. You got the dude from Breaking Bad making commentary on it as if he understands the nuances of policies and execution. And again, I don't know. I'm not saying good, bad, the other way, but the pressure that our school district is under now, one, is not good for our children. No. I had Alexis Morgan, the state PTA president, on the show earlier today. And it's like, listen, you have Renaissance High School. They're doing a walkout. Okay. Renaissance High School, the best, the shining star for West Ada academically, right? It's a school of choice. Those kids are monsters. They are great. And you know what they're doing? They're doing a walkout. Now, walkout, yes, no, none of my affair. You know what I do care about? The AP tests are at the beginning of May. So you have these students who presumably are gearing up for college credit tests in 6 weeks. And what are they doing? They're doing a walkout. And they're having a walkout because the adults in the district are in conflict. Now, is that conflict best for kids? Some people say, hey, look, you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. Like, we're going to have this thing. And like, it just adds importance to the movement. Okay, fine. But I do know there are other people saying, no, unequivocally, no. This conflict is not best for the kids at Renaissance High School. This conflict is not best for the kids at Lewis and Clark that are, you know, I'm sure getting all kinds of media attention just trying to go to school and learn basic middle school things. This conflict is not best for kids. So coming back to your point, if the why stays at the front of this discussion, then that gives a guiding principle to like, how do we move forward? What should our next step be? What's our why?
Well, we live in a very politicized environment. I would call it hyper-partisan, right? And we've watched the pendulum swing back and forth. The farther it swings one way, the farther it's going to swing the other. And we're in the backlash of that right now. You know, there were things that happened in our country over the last 20 years that the general population was not in favor of. They were not behind. And we're seeing a backlash to some of those things with, you know, sort of the elimination of anything that's DEI. I don't, you know, in my lifetime, I've lived through where diversity was a new thing, and then it was a little controversial, and then it became a good thing, and then it became more controversial, and it just goes back and forth where now it's like a dirty word that nobody uses hardly anywhere, right? And where did inclusion, the sense that everybody belongs, where did that become a dirty word? How could that be a bad thing? That everyone belongs here. So it's problematic because we're not having the conversation about the substantive issues. What do we really want to do? Because words become loaded. And then as, you know, anybody listening to this later may say, well, Phil's this or that based on using those words, right? Like, I'm not going to listen to that. I'm probably...
Forget those people. We're not talking to those people
I'm
anymore.
Probably as centrist as it gets.
Sure.
Like, you know, and the reality is, I think, and this is a bias, right? I think wisdom is in the middle. I think wisdom is in a balance. That's the subtitle of a book that I co-edited a few years ago. It's called, you know, A Balanced Governance Approach. So how do we draw a little bit from here, a little bit from here, and how do we bring it together? The exciting thing maybe, and I don't know, others will have different opinions on this, it's pretty cool to see those kids care that deeply. And I hear what you're saying, that there's an instructional time that's lost, and that may hinder their score on the AP exam in a few weeks. And they're also learning potentially other life skills. So regardless of the right, wrong, and whether we, you know, lean this way or that way on the particular issue, these students are having this opportunity to engage that could be powerful and transformative for their lives, you know, because we would hope that it leads to their more active engagement in positive civic action in the future, right? So
Sure.
That'd be my hope.
You know what would be interesting? I remember I went into Cal as a math major. I was a big fan of math. And then I was, again, an argument for public education. I did not know how to write to save my life. And my sophomore year in high school, English teacher, I was in the advanced English class, and her husband committed suicide in like the second week. and we had a substitute teacher like the rest of the year,
Sure.
right? And I'm not talking the same one. I mean, like somebody. So I lost pretty much a whole year, and then I went on to when I did go on to AP English when I was a junior. Total train wreck. Like I was just scrambling to get everything together. Anyway, so I was really, really bad at writing, and I had to take a remedial writing course that helped me finally understand how to communicate. And that was in college. And I switched my degree to rhetoric. And I'm so thankful for it. I mean, because now, Jordan Peterson has this beautiful perspective, which is, look, is there anything more powerful than being able to express yourself, right? More clearly, more appropriately. And I deeply feel that in my life because I know what it was like to be a 20-year-old and not know how to express myself. And it was very, very painful. It was very difficult. Because of that, I had to take this course called, Rhetoric of Legal Philosophy. And I remember it very distinctly. I was 20 years old at the time. I had this teacher who was French, and she was like, listen, this is going to be the heavy lift for your semester. So like when things are tough and you ask for an extension, you come to me last. We're like, geez, man. All right. The point is, in one particular lecture, she was articulating a legal philosopher that had said, look, to really understand effective policy, you have to remove yourself from the happenings of everyday life. Right. And she said the idea was, look, if we all existed in this cloud above everyone, and we did not know how we would come down into the actual society. We might come down as a very wealthy, controlling individual. We might come down as a very, very poor, disenfranchised individual. We don't know. Okay. What we would do then as a thought experiment at the top is say, look, what would the best policy to be? Knowing you could be on either end of the spectrum, right? And that's essentially this thought experiment of like, okay, well, what is the best policy, right? If we don't know if we're going to be rich, we don't know if we're going to be poor, we don't know if we're going to all these things. I understand why students at Renaissance walked out, because they felt that at the very least, to some degree, that there was a commentary that not everybody was welcome in West Ada. And I understand what you're saying, which is like, this is an opportunity to, engage in civic things and whatnot. What I would love before the walkout is for somebody to sit down and explain the problems that the community is engaging in, right? Explain the problems that we're confronted with, specifically to what you're saying. You have an influx of newer people. You have this clash of conservative and liberal, all of these problems, and then work them through. Okay, how do we make a policy that honors the left, honors the right, honors the people that love Biden, honors people that love Trump? Like, how do we make a policy around all of these things? Now, if we want to object to the execution, great, but like, can we at least look at the policy first? Right. That, to me, like that would be the most civic and civic-oriented and long-term benefit I could imagine offering students. And whatever they come up with is fine, but sharing the problem before you take action, right? Like that's my thing, which is, look, share the problem. Share the thing that we're all trying to work towards. And then if you want to object to the outcome, that's fine, but you're not objecting before you even understand the problem, or at least the intention behind the actions. That's a big thing for me.
Well, it's those community gatherings where we do get at values and vision people have for their schools, right? That's the kind of conversation. Yes. In the midst of a particular controversy, there's always the political pieces that are really critical. Right. And I'm sure in this case, there are legal considerations, right? So today is, as far as I know, like, because I don't have any inside information here. Today's not a good day for somebody at West Ada to stand up and say, okay, we're going to lead a conversation that brings everybody together.
Today's not the day.
Right? Attorneys would be having a fit over that one, right? So, but the challenge is, right, and the human nature problem is, how do we work and act proactively so that the full community has an opportunity to weigh in on these kinds of policy decisions in advance? And then, again, recognizing the context in which we're in. If you go back just a few months when lots and lots of folks that were doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work, they started scrubbing all that off of their websites, off of their LinkedIn pages, Facebook pages, wherever. They saw this coming where that was not going to be politically acceptable. And we're seeing large corporations, even like Target and stuff, having to dance around. Well, it's like, well, we believe this, but, we're going to be careful. It's a mess right now. Like on anything that has to do with those three areas, I would add in the word belonging, probably after inclusion, but it's a quagmire that is very difficult to dance through and find a path or wording, as we've seen all of our state universities struggle with, the State Board of Education wrestle through, the legislature come down on, and now the presidential administration, do a big heave ho. Like, how does one navigate that proactively? So parents, family, caregivers, students, staff, concerned community members are at the table in a conversation with a school board before policy is adopted.
Can I ask you something? Okay. Because I've interviewed pretty much, I think, every single Democrat in the legislature, some multiple times, with the exception of two. Okay. And I talk to them on and off air, and I would consider them all friends. Like, I really enjoy all of the conversations I've had with both sides of the aisle. That doesn't mean I agree with everyone, but I enjoy the conversations.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
One thing that I feel like is this misunderstanding is they say what you said, which is like, when did diversity become a bad thing? When did having equity or inclusion become a bad thing? And I can tell you from my very limited dumb standpoint, I worked in college admissions for almost 20 years. And I can tell you towards the end, the frustration that people had with like, okay, I'm trying to get my son into like UCLA.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get my son in or my daughter into UC Berkeley. They're not a minority. They have two parents. They go to a fine school district.
Yeah, I hear you.
What do we have to do? And that is a frustration that a large portion of the country, I think, has with, when did we get away from meritocracy? Which is like, look, my kid has this GPA or my kid has this score. Like, when is it going to be enough? Now, a lot of these people were misinformed. Okay. Because I remember one argument with a mom. She's like, only 15% of people at UCLA come from California. Anyway, the rest are out of state. The rest are international. The rest are, I was like, that's absolutely not true. And I looked it up actually on the fly because I was so bothered with her. I was like, okay, lady, look, 49% of UCLA comes from Southern California. Like, another 25% comes from Northern California. 10% comes from out of state. 15% come anyway.
Here's the facts, by the way.
Yeah, right. Here we go. And like, this is the UCLA website, right?
Yeah.
And again, I'm always down for like, what's reality? Wherever we land on the spectrum of politics, it doesn't matter to me.
Sure.
But that's part of the problem that people have, which is, I think there's a large portion of people that view DEI as a motivating factor that runs parallel to meritocracy, which is, who deserves this? And are we going to say deserving on capacity or deserving because of these Northern stars, these guiding principles? That's the objection, which is like, people say, hey, I don't object to diversity. I object to diversity supplanting competence.
Yep. And as we've talked, the pendulum swings. The pendulum swings too far, right? It swings both ways. But that's why DEI is reviled, because it's like, I get it. Right. That's it.
But
But we didn't get rid of the bathwater. We got rid of the baby. Like, right? I mean, seriously, that's where we're at. We got rid of the baby. We got rid of opportunities to actually do good, not only for individual people, but for society as a whole. Because you know this, a classroom benefits when there's different ways of seeing the universe sitting in the classroom, and there's a rich, safe conversation about, well, I see it this way and I see it that way, and my life experience says this and mine says that. Like, we've all been there, where we can see that benefit of enriched perspectives.
Phil, that's the whole nature of this podcast.
Well,
like, let's bring different perspectives. I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, so I said a few times in the last couple of years, I don't know when teaching kids to be nice became a bad thing. And I was with one school district a year and a half ago where a gentleman bristled and said, well, it's because of what they've done with it. Now, I didn't immediately know what he was referring to. Like, right? But we actually followed up, stayed in conversation afterwards, exchanged some emails, had some phone calls, and I began to see what he was referring to. Like, that you can push certain political, social agendas under the guise of just about any good intent, like teaching kids to be nice. it seems foreign to me, and definitely a travesty or a loss, because God knows we all need to be nicer.
Yes.
Like myself included. So how do we equip students to have a safe and effective learning environment where they're not hitting each other, throwing things at each other, saying bad words to each other, using racial slurs or whatever the case may be? Like, how do we keep that space centered on learning and teaching and not distracted either by trying to promote some sort of perspective or by just not addressing kind of wrongs, if you will, in the classroom?
I love that you, first off, wonderful that you stayed in contact with that guy and flushed that out, because I think what you said hits the nail on the head. I think people from other areas outside of Idaho have deeply experienced a situation where positive virtues and sentiment have been bastardized and manipulated to create poor policy. And
Sure.
Look no further than the homeless problem in California under the sentiment of compassion.
Got it. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's absolutely correct. That it's not that people don't want people to be nice. It's that they're afraid that in pursuit of, nice, in the pursuit of that, those policies can be driven or policies can be made that veer away from the mission.
So most of my adult life was spent in Oregon and Washington, and trust me, I've seen that. As I was getting ready for the Portland Marathon, I think it was 2011, and all the Occupy people were there.
Yes.
And right up until the last day or two before the marathon, the organizers did a yeoman's job of trying to figure out, how do we not infringe on these people and their rights, and how do we keep it safe and sane for the runners? And so, they erected fences quickly and did some things to make it work. But that's inevitably a challenge with any type of public policy. We saw the ridiculousness in Oregon the last couple of years with their stance on decriminalizing all types of drugs, right? And the influx of people that have moved from the dirty C word into Oregon because they're not going to be arrested or whatever. And they've had to back off some of that because they realize they don't have the resources to actually provide those people the care and the services, the humanity, if you will, the humane conditions that are needed. So how do we not throw out the baby, regardless of the topic? Like, just not throw out the baby. How do we stay in conversation, focus on purpose, and get people to, just ratchet down some of the rhetoric a little bit and say, I had this really intense and marvelous community gathering last Monday night in Council, Idaho, district with a couple hundred kids, but their community came together. We had one session with a little more than 50 and another with a little more than 30. But at the very start of the second session, this lady who had been extremely upset at the start of the first session, she said, I'm finding we agree on almost everything here. Right?
God's like, can I get an amen?
All we have to do is stay around the table.
Yeah, right.
If we just stay around the table, pizza helps, right? Feed people or give them a good cup
coffee
of
or tea or whatever it is.
Warm cinnamon tea.
Yeah, it's the best.
How do we keep people in the conversation? So just because somebody uses a word or expresses a thought that we don't fully agree with, no, we're not calling them the devil or thinking that we're God, like they're bad. But we've got enough sense to realize every single human being is a bit good and a bit bad, right? And we're all flawed, but we need and deserve the respect as being a human being, whoever the person is.
I love every second of what you're saying. I had, again, in the last 72 hours, I've been just because I allowed West Ada to come in. I asked him every question I could think of, both of the board member and the actual administrator.
Nice.
In 2 different episodes. And I didn't yell at them. I asked them very clearly, why is this a policy? Who made the decision? What about it is wrong? What were the alternatives? Couldn't you just leave it? All these different things. People have come after me like I'm the devil. And I finally this morning, there was one person who, keeps coming after me. And it's like, can you just let the process work?
Right.
Like, can you just let the show work? I promise you, I'm trying as hard as I can to get other perspectives on the show so we can talk about this. Just stay in the game.
Yeah.
But if everybody calls for the termination of the platform because the first person out of the gate was a person they disagreed with, every time I publish something,
Right.
people will be mad at me,
Right.
which absolutely happens. People are mad at me every single time. But it's like, if you just let it work, we're going to have these different perspectives. We're going to start understanding each other. I hope that's what I'm trying to do. And that's how we start coming back to the table and realizing, like, okay, maybe we need to tweak the policy. Maybe the policy was fine. The execution was bad. Like, can we just get down to the nuts and bolts and get away from the vitriol on the rhetoric of like, well, you are all obviously like Nazi racists.
Right,
it's like,
right.
okay, maybe that's not the case here, right?
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe it is. I don't know. But like, maybe it's not the case. Can we just hang at the table long enough?
Yeah, but once we get people in that box, right?
Right.
Once you get them in a certain box, we've dehumanized them.
Right.
Right. They're this, they're that. And so I'm on higher moral ground. I'm obviously better than that. Like, right. So it's just a human nature problem we all have to fight, like to not label people, even the ones that we disagree with, even the ones that call us bad names. What's been ironic through the years is my most liberal friends who love to talk about being open-minded, being this, being that, they're the most harsh and critical people I've ever met oftentimes when it comes to them talking about a conservative. Like, right? It's okay, wait a minute, folks. Let's dial it back down. These are human beings here. And this is really important when it comes to administrators and school board members as elected officials from the community, administrators as highly paid, highly educated, highly trained professionals. Like, it's too easy for us to go, ooh, who do they think they are? It's like, they got up this morning, they put pants on one leg at a time. They're a human being. Can we start there? Can we start with, this is a human being I'm talking with, and they may have a whole different slant on the world based on whatever their life experience and, affiliations are. Sometimes, unfortunately, we're all kind of tribal. And we certainly see that in the political arena now. So there's this one platform, and you either fully subscribe or
Right.
you're not.
You have
you're
to,
not one of
you
them.
have to pick a
right.
team.
And then there's the other platform, and it's like, okay, but there's some good things over here and there's some good things over there. Could we come and talk about it?
I had a gentleman email me off of the website on Friday. So I interviewed the folks from West Ada on Thursday. I didn't even publish the interviews on Thursday. I published a small clip. I ran out of time.
Yeah.
I do this all by myself. So they go out 6 a.m. on Friday morning. And in between, I published one clip. This gentleman gets a hold of me off the website, says the most horrific, mean things you could say to me. And I email him back. I'm like, hey, first, thanks for your note. And second, you seem really upset. Can I ask you what you're really upset about? And so again, lead with appreciation and curiosity, right? And he goes on to say, again, a bunch of really, really mean things. It was clear he just looked at my two most recent podcasts, which happened to be with Jason Monks and Representative Monks and Representative Tanner, and both conservative guys. All right. And through the conversation with him, I said, okay, well, if I may ask, what would you like to hear about? And he articulated, education, mental health, suicide rates, all of these things. I'm so trash, blah, blah, blah. And I instantaneously emailed him back with all of the people from the crisis hotline, from education, from medical, from all of these different people that I've interviewed that he didn't take the time to actually read all or engage in the other. And by the end of the exchange, by the end of that day, he wrote me an email saying, Matt, I really wish you luck in your endeavor. Like, I love Boise and,
Love
we
it.
need, and it's like, there we go, man. Just hang at the table with me.
Yeah. Did you offer him cinnamon tea? Because
I offered to have him on the show.
Oh, okay.
I 100% was like, listen, I would love to have you on. I'd love to share a pot of coffee. Come on and talk to me about what you see. You obviously really love this community, and you seem really upset. And we should have those people understood, right? It's like, and that's fine. Like, we don't even just talk, whatever you want to talk about. You want to have a cup of coffee and just talk. That's fine. So, and he did not take me up on that, which is fine. I think a lot of people get nervous around mics and stuff. But again, it's that kind of thing where, just like you're saying, if we stay at the table, we end up being like, all right, man. We're like 99% of the way there. Like, I disagree about this, but like, we're 99% of the way there.
So, 4 to 4.5 years ago, when we were starting to see the vitriol around COVID, like there was that initial shock phase, and then there was the backlash and the moving into camps,
Right.
pro-vax, anti-vax, pro-mask, anti-mask,
Open schools, closed schools, blah,
yeah,
blah, blah.
all of it and everything that went with it. And in the midst of that time, I kept saying and thinking, and I was living and working in the state of Texas at the time. And so it in a lot of ways, Texas is a lot like Idaho, but not every way. There was this wondering that I had, those people that are so angry, so intense, so incensed, could a thoughtful, dutiful school board and administration, could they bring those people in over the next 6 months to a year? Could some of those people be some of the most engaged, involved citizens in the good of the school system, right? Now, I don't know specifically if or where that's been happening, but I have to believe, as you talked about the gentleman, that, some of those people, he cared enough to listen, and he cared enough to email you, and he cared enough to look at some of the things you sent. So those people are less problematic for me than the apathetic ones. Right. The ones that may feel like, well, public education doesn't do anything for me. I don't have kids in the school, or I already pay for my kids to go to private school, so why should I have to pay twice for those public school kids? It's like, well, we pay for public school because public school offers a public benefit. It gives us as a public an educated workforce, people that are able to not only earn more money for themselves, but to add more to the overall economic contribution and the betterment of society. We pay for a public good, a public service, so that students grow up and give something back. Right? It's not we're throwing money down the tube and it goes away and never comes back. These are living, breathing human beings that are in our communities, our states, our country. And, if they're equipped to do good, they're a lot more likely to do it.
There's and I had briefly mentioned to you the film Monster.
Yeah.
Charlize Theron from, I think it was 2003. Yeah. And that part, I remember seeing it when I was like 21. I was in college. It was such a horrific film because you see this person who's a prostitute and she's living a hard life, man. She's getting abused and beat and trauma, like all these things. And at one point, she goes out to try to apply for like temp positions and essentially try to get out. She finds somebody that she cares about and she's like, I'm gonna try to improve my life.
Yeah.
And the temp agency, and again, I haven't seen it in like 20 years, but the temp agency essentially blows her off because they're like, you don't know how to type.
Exactly.
You don't have discernible skills. And she gets shot down from going to these job interviews. And then she's like this total browbeaten person walking down the street. And then a cop picks her up and ends up abusing her in the cop car. Like, it's all these terrible things. And I remember seeing that thinking like, what is she supposed to do now? What is she supposed to do? She has nothing to offer.
Absolutely.
And she's left to this, and it's so heartbreaking to conceptualize somebody in that position, male, female, whatever. Like it's so rough to imagine somebody who has no value to offer society.
In our perception of them. And, it's painful.
Yes.
Close to my heart is a young lady that I've known ever since she was a baby. And her mother was in my living room about 6 years ago talking with my wife, and I just overheard the conversation where she said, well, what's so-and-so going to do? And she was prostituting herself in Nevada. What's so-and-so going to do? She doesn't have any skills. She can't get a job. She can't get a job that at least pays for herself. And while I could be frustrated or argumentative with the mother, I wasn't a part of the conversation. It was heartbreaking to just even imagine people are growing up in 2025 in the state of Idaho without marketable skills, without an ability to read or write or do math at a level that can be employable. Or
CTE skills, whatever.
Exactly. Whatever the skills it is, and the drive and the ambition, and maybe the leg up or the hand up, like that ability for somebody to say, hey, why don't you try this, right? How do we live with ourselves knowing that we're not providing that for each and every child? Like in this modern situation where we've got vouchers, they've been coming for years. I've never seen such a strange set of bedfellows as the anti-public education, the privatizing public education folks. This is not new. It's been going for decades. Like, what is the singular issue that Oprah, Donald Trump, Bill Gates, George Bush, Hillary Clinton, what is the single issue that these people, these elites, right, would agree on? And the single issue seems to be privatizing public education, like blowing it up. Every single one of those names that I mentioned have been part of this campaign for decades, trying to push for the dismantling of what we've appreciated, what I personally benefited from, public education. And as I see it, I wonder what the real motives are, right? Like, how much money can there be, or what is this benefit to them as individuals or to their friends? What is this benefit to leave a big block of our population undereducated? How does that serve an interest? And I don't know. I'm not close enough to that billionaire class to understand how they think or what they're thinking, but it's truly bizarre. Never imagined such a strange set of bedfellows as I've watched this over the last 2+ decades evolve into this concerted effort to just dismantle, underfund, defund public education as we know it. And I don't know, Matt. I don't know where things are headed.
Well, Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil. Look, let's do this. I think we're about to engage in a broader, different conversation than the why. I think you've articulated the why with public education very well. I would really appreciate if you took the time to come back on. Let's not kill people with the first episode here.
Okay.
We need to have, this is a conversation we need to have. We need to understand what the value proposition is moving forward, what our educational landscape looks
Agreed.
like, how we engage communities more appropriately, how we get better communication between the leadership and administration and our communities, right? Like, how do we get this better? Because again, ultimately, I think at the end of the day, the wrangle that we're in with West Ada is a failure to have a community that can weather storms, right? And people are now in their corners and they're very mad, and everybody's been waiting for this moment. That's a failure of community in my mind. And I don't know anything.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, if there appears to be a conflict between the teachers, the actual educators, and the administration, why the policies are in place that come into the teachers' classrooms. What's the value proposition for those teachers? One of the big questions that people had is, why did you take this down? Why did you require this teacher take this down if there weren't any complaints?
Right.
So is there a value proposition for the teacher, in fact, to take it down in the absence of a very specific conflict? And, that's a failure of helping people understand the value of even policy that's made by the board and integrating and getting buy-in from the educators with that policy instead of having conflict.
Well, and policy has to have an agreed shared why, right?
Yes.
And if people are not in on something, they're not going to be up on it. So
there we go.
If teachers, parents, students, other concerned community members are not at the table when policy is adopted, and trust me, generally policy is really boring. Like, not to be offensive to friends and colleagues that, put their whole life into that. But it's generally not the most enthusiastic subject, right? It's not like a sporting event or something where there's a winner.
Right.
But this does highlight an opportunity where it would be a great chance once things have kind of calmed down enough. Right?
Not today.
Calmed down enough.
Probably not the end of the week.
And it's not a legal issue. It's, okay, how do we sit down together? How do we talk about this across the table? Districts like West Ada are especially prone for a different kind of problem. Like, I can talk about going to council or Marsing or Fruitland. We have a lot of communities that's obviously the hub. The school district is the entity that kind of holds it all together. At West Ada, you've got these very diverse, different groups of people and multiple communities within the school community. All to say, it's a lot more challenging.
Right.
And trust me, in those small areas, like Fairfield or wherever, it's still challenging to come together. It's just a whole extra set of challenges when you've got that level of space geographically and diversity of thought.
Yeah. Let's keep the conversation going.
Thanks.
I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate the conversation. This one has been, wow, man. It exceeded my expectations, and we barely scratched the surface. So again, thank you for coming in. Let's do it again.
It's an honor to be here with you. Thank you, Matt.